Recently, in the last 5 years, I worked at Ministry of Defence and Revenue and Customs in the London boroughs of Gilling and...
My sympathies.
What?
My sympathies.
Well, the question is it necessary for the organisation to have an agile outlook on life, an agile mindset, to be successful in agile? Putting it differently, if I tried to sell agile to the organisations I've mentioned, they wouldn't be able to take it on board. They're familiar and comfortable with business as usual. I have a problem getting them to sign up for what is conventional best practice, let alone something forward-looking.
Okay, so there seems to be a couple of things in there. Go on.
The question is, how would I sell it to a government or local government organisation?
Okay, so I personally had a couple of questions there. How would you sell it, and is it necessary for an organisation who wants to be agile to have an agile mindset, not just go through the motions? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so interesting questions, particularly with regards to government organisations you're talking about there as well.
Yes.
Okay.
They spend a fortune and they really don't get value for money.
Okay, all right. Anybody from the panel like to take that one on?
Can people hear? Yeah. So I think one of the things I'll just agree with, it probably won't answer your question. One of the things, well, the reputation that local government has are people that are in a job and they just want to do what their job. What Agile gives people the opportunity to take responsibility for what they're doing. And some people push back against that. Some people, certainly in a development environment, don't want to have that responsibility. They just want to be told what to code. And with Agile, what we're saying to people is, this is what we want. You probably know best how to do it. You get on with it. We'll leave you alone for a certain period of time and give you the responsibility to work out how it's done rather than tell you what to do. We're just going to tell you what we want. And some people find that hard. Oftentimes it's a cultural thing, maybe within an organisation or a geographical area. But I've certainly seen that from if you're looking bottom up in Agile adoption and resistance that you get.
My personal, sorry, David.
Sorry, go on.
So the very first Agile project that I worked on was with the NHS. A government organisation. I know that some of the guys in the room here have been working with some fairly, bureaucratic, shall we say, government organisations, both here and abroad. So it certainly is possible, and personally from my perspective, it doesn't really seem to have much of a pattern between private and public, because I see a lot of non-governmental organisations that really struggle with the idea of an agile culture. But the common pattern, regardless of where it is, seems to be that once you've seen proof, then the culture is easier to establish. So to your two questions, how do you get things going? Do you need the culture first? You don't, my personal opinion is you don't need that culture to get things going, but you do need that culture to establish it and to keep it going. The only way you're going to get the culture is by producing some results, by doing it. And in the larger organisation, probably shouldn't say this on camera, but it's a lot easier to do something without people knowing what you're doing. Yeah? So one of the benefits of a government organisation really is that you can get away with a lot without people knowing what you're doing and then seeing the results. And that's really how we got started in the NHS projects.
Yeah, I was actually going to say a very similar thing. One of the things actually in Betfair, not everybody was sold on the idea, by the way. But one of the things which certainly prompted us to move further, actually provide some acceleration behind that, was a success story with one project. And we didn't really say, oh, this is running in an agile way, but we set them up and we let them just get on with it. And it soon became apparent, just due to the transparency and the success that the project was having sprint by sprint, that, oh wow, it's starting to get a bit of attention. What's going on over here which is different from anywhere else. And that propelled us to actually take further teams and move them quicker into that way of working or organisation.
Okay. Great question, thank you.
Yeah.
I saw another hand up somewhere in the middle. Yes, sir? Sonia's going to be wandering over the microphone. I'll try and repeat your question as well.
I was wondering what lessons learned from distributed teams, because I think we've just recently delivered a project which involved teams in Tokyo, Ukraine, London, New York, Chicago. tried to do it in an agile fashion, but there's no question that there are challenges there, particularly around time zones and having different skills in different countries. How have you got around that? Because you mentioned distributed teams at Betfair. What lessons have you learned to try and make that work? Because it's, I'd suggest it's been quite tricky in our case.
I think try and keep it simple. I mean,
don't work with people in other countries.
As companies become more and more global, I think the question is not how do we avoid it, but it's inevitable. We're going to have to tackle the situation, and it's. I'm sure you guys have some comments as well on this. In some ways, we're quite simplistic in that matter. We're able to actually coordinate with our resource fairly well, and we can actually. A model we've actually taken is to have cross-functional teams. And rather than have teams in one country and another country, we've tried to blend them across time zones in that way. What's difficult, typically if you're doing the multiple time zones, is obviously having the visibility or the contact, the collaboration points. So sometimes that has to change. And we'll say, okay, at some point we'll hold the stand-up at this time for this particular sprint, and to give these guys a break. Over here, we're probably suffering getting up at an earthly hour. We'll change it around. There are other ways you can deal with that. Maybe it's by mail, maybe it's providing updates before these guys go offline, etc. But it really depends on the complexity of the setup.
So it was a conscious decision from your part then, David, at Betfair to merge the teams rather than have dedicated teams in each location?
Yes, and we've done both. We've tried both. There's one project we have at the moment which is doing a little bit of both, and they're trying it different ways to see which works for us. Going back to my point earlier, I don't think there's any golden egg in this area. We have to try things to see what work and what's going to benefit for the group to work together.
And just to add further complexity to that, and I believe Betfair do this as well, is that we've got an outsourced company in there as well that we're working with. And I think we might have the same outsourced company actually. But it's that introduced additional challenges as well, or has that just worked to the point of being a blended team and everybody's happy and it all works lovely?
Everything's challenged, so nothing fits into place straight away. We do have a couple of outsourced teams. We do have one project which has two outsourced teams, both in two different countries. And again, it prompts the same challenges. The tool certainly provides us with support and visibility. I mean, certainly when we start thinking about distributed teams, a good tool to provide us what's going on a sprint-by-sprint basis and a progress you can update of a virtual world is certainly beneficial. In an ideal world, it'd be great to have one collaboration or physical wall. And again, in this scenario, it's not that possible. So a tool certainly helps in that. But it takes time to build up that team dynamic as well.
I think rather than not just a tool, technology, if you can take things off email, get voice over IP going. Another method that I've seen used before is when they have release management meetings or release planning, they will bring a different person each time into the head office. So they alternate, so the team becomes known to each other.
Just to touch on that point, which I think is very valid. Before we kicked off this project with the two companies outsourced, we actually brought them in to the company, into Betfair, to actually have our kick-off or inception phase, our agile planning phase, which certainly helped. It introduced everybody, gave people face time, understood which role they were playing, and set the expectation well.
Yeah, we did that and everybody just got drunk. So that was fun.
That's even better. Yeah, but certainly, it's quite expensive to do that on a regular basis. So alternating who comes over for those meetings helps out. There's one other thing that was very important.
Sorry, Karl looks like he's itching to get something.
Yeah, although I think everyone said what I was going to say actually, so I might just stay quiet at the end. No, I think just to kind of reinforce that point, once you meet somebody and you know their personality, you know their face, then communicating over email and IM just becomes so much easier. I know when I'm on mailing lists, I can say things on mailing lists to people that I know personally that I wouldn't say to people that I've never met before. So actually kind of bite the bullet, get people across so that they go out and get drunk with each other as early as possible. And then keep some kind of rotation, just particularly when you've got different cultures in there, because it helps break down some of those cultural boundaries as well.
Another method I've seen is one other quick point that I just remembered. What some teams do, where they have product management, say in one country, and development in another one, is to have with the developers a sort of a proxy, so a business analyst in there as well. So you don't have just distinct functions if you've got one team spread across geographical regions. And just one other quick thing. We're talking about geographically dispersed, development in Ukraine or Romania, and it doesn't have to be. There's evidence to say that if you're in the same building and on a different floor, you've still got these problems. Probably not so expensive to get people together, but you still have those problems of collaboration.
I also like a really simple tip that I picked up, is just to try and avoid referring to onshore and offshore teams. Just refer to them as teams, because if you start talking about onshore and offshore, the offshore team suddenly starts feeling like they're second best, whereas if they're just teams in different locations.
Okay, good. Any other questions? At the front, just behind you, Sonia.
Hi, what's the role of the project managers? Because always there's the idea of having the same guy doing the technical stuff plus project managing projects, and even technical people say, please stop with project management and let me do my job.
Interesting question. So David's title is Head of Agile Project Management, yeah? And he also said he's doing Scrum, and in Scrum there's no project manager. So it'd be interesting. So that whenever I'm asked that question, I always say there's a lot of project management in Agile projects. There's just no project manager per se. But it'd be interesting to see what other people have to say. So, go on then, David, go for it. Explain your job title, David.
Like I said, it was a little bit of a misdemeanor, but we have inherited a legacy of project management and traditional way of working. So the project manager does exist. We've slightly changed the role and called it something else. We entitled it the Agile Project Manager. And really, we assess this on a project-by-project basis. So sometimes that person can be doing pure project management. Other times that person is acting as a Scrum Master. And other scenarios, that person is acting as a logistical manager or reporter through a centre of excellence or to somewhere like a body like the PMO. So it does differ. But the reason we call it Agile Project Manager is to provide that flexibility when necessary, depending on the role. Now, you could say, and going back to your point, in an ideal world, and I know there's so many discussions and blogs about this on the internet. If we're pure Agile, should we have a project manager? Yeah, to be honest, I can't really answer that question. Different circumstances deem for different things. And certainly, if that role is taken up by someone else, well, possibly that may work in your environment. But if there's a need for someone actually to take on that responsibility, then there's a valid reason to have that role.
I find project managers are best at looking at the medium and longer term strategic goals of a project. And what Agile and Scrum with the Scrum Master role allows is to allow the team to focus on the shorter term tactical decisions about how are we going to get this done. So the project manager can focus on what do we do next. And then the project manager and the product owner maybe get a little bit blurred. But I find that short term tactical versus long term, medium term strategic a useful distinction to think about the different roles.
So I've seen at least 2 organisations that have said, right, we've got lots of project managers here. Scrum doesn't have project managers. Bye-bye project managers. And fired all their project managers. Okay? Didn't really work for them. I've seen one organisation, no, at least more than one organisation that said, we don't have project managers, Scrum doesn't have project managers, Scrum has Scrum Masters. We don't have Scrum Masters. Project managers, you are now called Scrum Masters. Okay? And that hasn't really worked for them either. So there's got to be some kind of other way. And whether it's a case of taking it on a project-by-project basis, whether it's taking it on a person-by-person basis, it's not black and white. Okay? And I don't think anybody, anywhere, has perfectly answered that question. I'm probably in the same kind of area as Karl, and I think project managers make excellent problem solvers. And your organisation, during its transformation, will have a number of problems. If you like to call them challenges, or if you like to call them opportunities, they will be things that need to get resolved. And project managers are fantastic people to have around to get those things resolved. So whether it's the medium term, long term, or whether it's the kind of macro level impediments, great people to have involved. Perhaps not necessarily at the team level. Who knows? Okay, thanks for the question.
Any
other
quick
questions?
follow-up on that? So I was working with the team last week, and that question came up, and I think there was one project manager in the room, and I said, how comfortable are you feeling with this? And he was loving it, because it freed him up to focus on the stuff that he liked doing, the stuff that he was good at, because he didn't have to worry about telling the team what to do. They could self-organise and do that themselves.
Yeah. I'll add something onto that, actually. I'm going back to your point, Geoff, as well. There isn't a black and white answer to that, and I think we have to in my experience, and I've had to err a side of caution to that, because we can't pigeonhole into boxes and saying you're X or Y. And some people have different attributes in one area than another. So I think it's careful to consider that, or leave it to consideration for the appropriate situation.
We got time for one more? Here, okay, sorry.
Right, hi, yes. We're currently looking for projects that you can't deliver in an agile fashion. We mentioned success earlier. We're hoping to fail in this, but just looking for some advice, really. And our findings have been that plenty of projects you can't do agile, but it's the stakeholders, the sponsors aren't ready to engage that way, the solution teams aren't ready, your suppliers aren't ready, there's an existing contract you'd have to tear up. But really, on a project-by-project basis, it's not just about software development. You could do infrastructure, business change, loads of different things once the people are ready. And I'm just wondering if there's any comments you could advise. Are there projects you wouldn't deliver in an agile fashion? Or are we heading in the right direction?
So, interesting, the way that I heard that was that it started off as there are some projects that you wouldn't apply Agile to. But then you define that as perhaps stakeholders aren't ready, or people aren't ready, or perhaps contracts are need to be changed. So is the project perhaps okay for Agile, but the environment that project is in at this moment in time might not be ready? So are there projects that by definition you wouldn't use Agile for, and are they all projects that perhaps just aren't quite right at the moment, but could be given the right circumstances?
Yes.
So have you at Betfair, did you say, you guys, this project isn't ready for you? Or this project will never be ready for it?
I don't think we've ever said never, but we've certainly recognised when it's not. And I think we've learned through that, to be honest. It's one of those things you do learn and pick up upon. We certainly don't want to force the issue. And a lot of the times we sometimes have in the past forced that issue. We say, okay, we work in Agile. We're going to work with a third party over here to partner with us and try to force them down a road where they're not capable of doing it. So we have to be sensitive to that and also understand, is that really the best way to get the best out of both teams or the delivery which we want? So yeah, it really depends.
And it might come down to, do you want to jump both feet into the deep end dealing with Agile, or do we recognise that that's a good place to be and we'll take a slightly slower, longer winded route there as we build up relationships with partners, as we figure out some of the more complicated situations around our architecture, the fact that we're doing hardware, we're building products. It might look a little bit different from textbook Scrum, for example. So again, where I was working last week, they're building next generation home media network streaming gateways, pretty complicated stuff, hardware, software, IP6, voice over IP, all sort of stuff. They're finding it difficult to build stuff done every 2 weeks, but they're figuring out how to break stuff down into smaller increments and how to coordinate those increments across multiple teams so that they can focus on getting something to market sooner. So it kind of partly comes down to, what do we mean by Agile?
Yeah.
There are certainly organisations, I wasn't sure if I could mention this, but I'm going to anyway, GE Turbines. They make turbines, wind turbines. They're Agile, and they work in an Agile fashion. And that's not all software by any means. One other point I think is very valid, that if you've got executives that feel, I'm not interested in this Agile, I just want to know how much it's going to cost me and when I'm going to get it. And that's a bit of a challenge.
Okay. How are we doing? One more? One more question?
I'll ask a second question.
Go for it.
I'm interested in data management. In a conventional development environment, that normally means releasing new editions of the database every month or 2 months, with sign-off, integration testing, all that kind of stuff. Does that look different in an Agile environment?
So does that look different in an Agile environment? Who'd like to take that one? Karl.
It probably looks different in that you're going to do things differently around databases and data structures and data management and data mining. because you're potentially going to need to build things to allow you to upgrade, downgrade, migrate data schemas that you might not build if you're trying to plan out your data structure right first time. So this is a conversation I had a lot when I was working at Yahoo, because we had complicated databases, and the technical architects wanted to figure out the database because they said databases are really difficult to change. And my argument is, well, why don't we build the databases so they're not really difficult to change, and build some extra stuff to make it easier to upgrade, downgrade, migrate data, etc. The argument went to and fro, but I think it looks different in that you might build your databases out differently, so that you're flexible to change. So I think the same arguments apply, that you can try and predict what your data structures need to look like, and if they end up looking different when you get there, you're stuck anyway. So let's just assume that they're going to change from day one and build it with that in mind.